Okay, great. It's 5 after the hour, so how about we'll just go ahead and get started? Everybody agree?
It's good for me.
Yep, sounds
Great.
good.
Great. So thank you to everybody joining us in today's webinar. My name is Jason Gilmore, and I'm the CTO of DreamFactory Software. Joining us is Rakuten RapidAPI CEO, Jed Eng. Jed will be talking about the API economy and the difficulties companies encounter when marketing and selling access to their APIs. He'll also introduce the Rakuten RapidAPI marketplace and talk about how the marketplace can help developers seamlessly find, test, connect, and of course, sell APIs. And I really think the RapidAPI marketplace is an amazing solution for two reasons. First, it provides developers with an amazing portal for finding, integrating, and managing third-party APIs. So for example, if you're building a new application and want to incorporate maybe text messaging, real-time translation, geocoding, or maybe even the latest cryptocurrency price data, you're practically guaranteed to find not only a capable, but a high quality API within the marketplace. So you're not forced to hunt around on the web for an appropriate API. You can go to this central portal where, as Jed will show you, they have a great directory and you can find one right away. Secondarily, if you've created an API that might be useful to others, you can very easily sell access to that API by adding it to the marketplace. They handle registration, discoverability, key exchange, and of course billing, allowing you to focus exclusively on building and maintaining that API. And of course, building and maintaining that API it's already a major undertaking unto itself. So before I pass the microphone over to Jed, I'd like to take just a quick moment to introduce a solution that can greatly reduce the amount of work and expense otherwise required to build and manage your APIs. So as you probably already know, let me switch slides here. As you probably already know, building and managing these APIs can be an expensive and a rather involved matter. At least here in the United States, development costs for even a single fairly basic API, frankly, can quickly stretch into the tens of thousands of dollars. Furthermore, it's often the case that developers think of APIs purely in terms of the code that needs to be written, right? The logic. But there's much more to it than that, right? We have to take into account authentication, documentation, role-based access controls, and the many other important features required to run a production API. And in fact, if you'd like to learn more about the expense associated with building these APIs, head over to calculator.dreamfactory.com. This is a very popular estimation tool we've built in which you can plug in information such as developer salaries, desired feature set, and other variables to better understand really just how expensive this process really can be. So that brings me to the solution, and that is the DreamFactory platform. The DreamFactory platform can dramatically reduce this expense and effort by providing a unified solution or a unified control plane for building, securing, and integrating your APIs. The platform supports almost 20 databases, including Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, MongoDB, and quite a few others. It also supports file systems such as AWS S3, SFTP, email delivery providers such as Mailgun and SMTP, and even IoT protocols such as AMQP and MQTT. Using our hosted or on-premise solution, you'll typically begin by auto-generating an API using one of DreamFactory's native connectors. So DreamFactory will give you the template for generating one of these APIs. Alternatively, you can use the scripted service connector to custom build an API using one of 3 supported scripting languages, including PHP, Python, and Node. Another great feature of the platform is the ability to add an existing API. So if you've already built one and you'd like to take advantage of other features the platform offers, you can mount it to DreamFactory using the remote services connector. This remote service connector not only supports the ability to add another REST API, for instance, but you can also add a SOAP API, and DreamFactory will actually convert that SOAP API into a REST-like interface. Now, once the API has been made available to the platform, you will secure it, and you can do so by applying authentication and role-based access controls. These API clients that are going to connect to your API, they can authenticate using a pretty wide variety of authentication solutions, including Active Directory, LDAP, OpenID Connect, and SAML. And that latter option gives you the ability to connect to third-party authentication solutions such as Okta or AWS Cognito or Auth0 or any other solution supporting SAML. The role-based access controls give administrators an amazing degree of control over which and how your endpoints are accessed. DreamFactory will also generate and manage the API keys for you. So you can associate one of the aforementioned role-based access controls to an API key, ensuring that your clients always access the API using rules in which you've expressly defined. Finally, you can apply business logic to do things such as validate API input, transform output. You can perform API composition if you require that multiple APIs be called as part of a single request and response workflow, or perform any other logic necessary to fulfill a particular API requirement. By taking advantage of DreamFactory's capabilities, only really, frankly, a small portion of which I've mentioned thus far, you're going to be able to build your applications faster, achieve your company goals under budget, and ensure your APIs are both secure and compliant, right? I would imagine many individuals in the audience deal with regulations such as GDPR or maybe POPI in South Africa or HIPAA or FINRA. DreamFactory can help you build APIs that meet these regulation and compliance standards. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the DreamFactory platform, I invite you, of course, to head over to our website at www.dreamfactory.com. But I also suggest heading over to academy.dreamfactory.com. Our academy offers a number of videos, instructional videos, which show you how APIs can be generated and accessed. We also have a number of more advanced videos there. And of course, you can check out our YouTube channel, which has several dozen, if not close to 100 videos there covering different aspects of the platform. If you have specific questions, of course, you can email us at info@dreamfactory.com. And finally, if you would just like to jump right in and get your hands dirty right now, I invite you to head over to genie.dreamfactory.com/register, where you can sign up for a free 14-day hosted trial. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Jed so we can learn more about the Rakuten RapidAPI marketplace. Jed, I'll just go ahead and stop my share.
You bet. Thank you, Jason.
Great. Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. So let's get started. Thanks for the intro, Jason, and thanks to the DreamFactory team for bringing this event together. And welcome to the Rakuten RapidAPI portion of the webinar. For those of you who are just new to this and haven't heard of us, we're the world's largest API marketplace. A quick introduction about me. I'm the head of Rakuten RapidAPI. My background is in building and scaling new tech ventures. I'm also active in the startup ecosystem as a Techstars mentor and a startup advisor. And in case any of you want to reach out to me, please do. My email is right there. And before I launch into this, I wanted to give some context into why we chose to work together with DreamFactory. As Jason pointed out, having a successful API program requires a lot of things, right? Building the business logic and then creating an API wrapper and maintaining that infra is a big enough challenge in itself. Then you've got all these other challenges in the life cycle of, publishing and monetizing your API. That's actually publishers of APIs are API consumers themselves, so there's value in that. And we also want to help developers such as yourselves launch their applications. And so that's really our vision of why we decided to partner up with DreamFactory and work together. Now, there are a lot of different views of actually what an API is. Some people see them as middleware, right, to connect, databases and applications. Some people see them as vehicles for service distribution. Other people see them as a technology to monetize from. In our world, we see APIs as building blocks for software development as the world shifts away from from monoliths to microservices. So you think about a modern application that might have 100 different building blocks. And if you're able to fulfill, let's say, 20 of them for using public APIs, then these are services that you don't have to build and maintain from scratch. And it opens up a lot of possibilities. And we see these benefits in four areas. The first one is in simplifying and accelerating application development by taking this building block approach to software development. The second is that relying on a third-party API usually means two things. One is cost certainty, because it's somebody who already is up and running and they know how to price services. And secondly, because that's all they do, they can provide cost-effective service due to economies of scale. The next reason is you often get better quality service from using an API provider rather than building it in-house. So even in a fairly large organization or product team that might have, let's say, 30 different developers, you maintain your own, let's say, mailing system. You might have 1.5 headcount, if that's allocated to that service. But you think on relying like a service provider like SendGrid, they have, tens or 20 or hundreds of people just working on this one service alone. So they accumulate expertise and can provide high quality service. And the final one is around like innovation. This is probably the most important value. In a certain product or development team, you have only so many headcount and roles and budget to manage. That limits the scope of what you actually can do. And APIs, in our view, let you do some really advanced functionality at a fraction of the cost of what you would do yourself, and let you spin up these services like in minutes. And we're big believers in the API economy. We see that developers are increasingly turning to APIs to develop faster and more cheaply instead of building from scratch. That graph in the background is actually the Google Trends search data for the term REST API. Now, this is clearly a market that's continuing to grow, and we don't see it slowing down in the near future. Reports from like Ovum and IBM predict this to be a $2.2 trillion market in the next 10 years. And there are other indicators also, for instance, like on programmable web, where they track the number of APIs being published. There's an average 40% growth year over year, and it's continuing to grow. What gets me really excited really is that I think we're working in the middle of like two mega trends. The first is the rise of native API companies. These are companies that you're probably familiar with, like Twilio, Stripe, and SendGrid and Adyen, who use APIs as a technology for service distribution. And in the last 14 years, these guys didn't exist. They've not only established the viability of the market, but also proven that they can be tremendously valuable. This slide here, the left part of it is almost always out of date because the valuations on these companies keep on going up. Twilio currently is hovering around an $18 billion market cap just from SMS alone and voice services. Stripe is currently, I think, $25 billion from payment processing alone. On the other side of it, we see the rise of the developer in the digital economy. As noted by two data points in 2018, this was the acquisition of GitHub by Microsoft and GitLab's latest funding round. What's really interesting for us is that we see both API providers and API consumers as developers themselves, which is I think a really powerful force. But despite all of this, I think there's a few very fundamental problems in the API economy today. And I'll cover these both on the API provider perspective and also for the developer user perspective. This pie chart here in the background is from Apigee's State of APIs report in 2016. What the data shows in the pie chart is that 90% of call traffic actually goes to 10% of API providers, or 10% of APIs. And the other 10% of APIs receive, the other 90% of APIs receive very little traffic. And this has always struck me as like very paradoxical, right? Because APIs are purely digital products, they exist on the internet, and they should be frictionless, but the reality is not. And so the observation is that for API providers, the risk is actually to be stuck in a digital ocean, because there are large platform incumbents, and if you have limited budget and resources, it's hard to be found and therefore hard to be successful. Other API provider challenges, especially if your organization is not API first, right? You're an enterprise, or you're a SaaS that's coming out with an API offering. The first one is organizational maturity or the evolution. We tend to observe that API adoption tends to go from inside out, from within the organization to external. So organizations typically start with APIs for operational efficiency point of view before exposing services externally. And very often, this is left to, development teams or developers who aren't properly supported. There isn't enough like business side thinking or marketing support to make these programs successful. The second is brand association. If you're already an enterprise or a SaaS company, your users probably think of you as, some brand or some vertical rather than as API first, which basically means that they're not searching for you for your APIs. The third is, something I call the build it and they will come syndrome, right? This is, I think, partly an organizational problem where companies create the APIs and then struggle to put together a coherent plan to attract users. The other issue is that, well, creating an API is only the first step. You need to do a lot of other things associated with that, like the management and monitoring tools, analytics, billing, payment, and collections if you want to monetize. And lastly, to put things in perspective, API-based business models are a relatively new phenomenon. So it's still early days and there's a lot of noise in the market. Shifting gears a bit and looking at the user point of view, let's start with this case study from a global hotel chain. This is their B2C app and some of the public APIs that they use. Um, they used Flights APIs from Google Flights to give users, reminders for when you're supposed to travel or when you're supposed to leave for the airport. They'll use weather data to show users, what the weather forecast is in their destination city. They'll use notification APIs like Twilio to maybe verify like purchases or when users transact using their credit card and on and on and on. Now, these 7 APIs are really a subset of the 20 or 30 public APIs that they use. You can immediately see that it gets very complicated quickly. Now, each API requires users or developers to create separate accounts. Each API has different plans. Each API has different keys, and then each API has different analytics, which you've got to manage on different platforms. And to sum up some of the challenges for our users, this is the way we see the world. Firstly, on the discovery side, by some estimates, there are over 30,000 public APIs out there. So actually, how do you find the right ones that are useful for your use case? Second, we know that API providers tend to be service specialists in a particular domain, which means that out of 30,000, public APIs, there are probably 28,000 API providers. And each API provider has their own version of a dev portal, which makes it very tedious for users to navigate and understand what's available to them. The last thing is that a bad API that doesn't function is basically dependency on your application. So how do you decide if an API is good enough to use without objective criteria? Second, for connection, each API has its own networking protocol, its own authentication strategy, its own security measures, right? They have different endpoints and formats, even though they perform very similar functions. Um, Blocking the connections is also the fact that for a lot of API providers, access is not on a self-service basis. There are all these barriers that you have in a way that require applying for permission or a partner program. Pricing might not be transparent, and these frictions are significant, especially in a CI/CD and DevOps world where you just need to move quickly through tens of thousands of steps. And finally, for management, if you're using multiple APIs, how do you know how these different services are affecting your application performance if they're all on separate dashboards? And you've got tremendous administrative pain through the lifecycle of your application. This has to do with managing security tokens, managing multiple builds, having to navigate different interfaces, and so on. And so these challenges around API providers and users were why we created Rakuten RapidAPI. You can think of us as an app store for APIs. So we're more than, we saw what was on the market, directories like programmable web, where they maybe solve discovery, but they stopped at that point. And what we're hoping to do is to cover that end-to-end user experience. Today, our footprint is 10,000 public APIs and 1 million users. And some of the companies that you might be already familiar with, companies like Twilio, like Microsoft and SendGrid are already on the platform today, and we're very proud to have them as our partners. And our value proposition to our users on both sides is as follows. The first one for API providers, it's about being discovered, right? So we're the largest API marketplace platform, and our users come to us with very clear search intent. They're looking for APIs and nothing else. We have the ranking tools to be for you to be featured and rated by users. For monetization, we are set up so that you can price your API and monetize from them using your business objectives and your cost structure. We take care of billing and collections, and we'll send it back to you on your share. Probably the most powerful one is our community. We have 1 million plus active users today and looking to grow this number as quickly as possible. We are also actively deploying our solution into enterprises, which basically creates a channel to sell into Fortune 500 clients. And finally, there's a whole management and analytics tool set where you can track users, see where they're coming from, track popular endpoints, and see how your API is performing. And for users, what we're delivering is a best-in-class API selection that we're growing all the time, and we work very hard on this. We have exclusive APIs that are not available elsewhere. One example is Skyscanner. So if you were to go to the Skyscanner portal, you actually have to apply for access, but their flight search data API on our platform is actually completely self-serve. For consumption, we build in all the tool set so you can test and configure endpoints within one browser. You can connect to multiple APIs within a single integration point without having to navigate elsewhere. For payment, we provide pricing in a transparent upfront cost. And in principle, it's always at the same price as by going direct or cheaper, which basically means that you don't have to navigate away. And you're not also paying more. And we're a single billing provider, so you pay one bill, and that's what you deal with on every month. You don't have to deal with like multiple accounts. And finally, for monitoring, we aggregate all your API consumption into a single pane of glass for management. So at this stage, I want to switch gears a little bit and show you our interface. We'll quickly run through how to like find, connect to APIs, test and integrate them, and manage them all from one dashboard. So this is what our site is. This is what it looks like. You can find us at english.api.rakuten.net. Okay, so it's english.api.rakuten.net. It takes you about maybe 30 seconds to create a new account and get in. And once you do, this is what you look for. This is what you see. There's a few ways to discover APIs. One is using the search bar. So for instance, if I search for machine learning, you'll see that we have something like 88 different results, and we can look through all of these and see what's available to us. Other ways to find APIs is to scroll down and to look at these different collections that we curate. We've got a best API list. We've got free APIs. We've got categories like SMS, like geolocation, like translation services, weather, emailing, and so on and so forth. If any of you on the webinar are API providers and you're interested in joining the platform, feel free to reach out to me in case you need help. We can probably look at placement in one of these specific collections or categories. Within the portal, you can also see where you can access the API provider dashboard and upload your API. There's also a documentation tab at the top there for instructions. I'll just quickly go one level down deeper into one of the APIs to give you a run through of our layout. Let's take SendGrid as an example. You'll see that each API has 3 performance statistics. This has to do with my point about about bad APIs creating dependencies on your application. We show this in three ways. One is a popularity score out of 10. Second is a latency in milliseconds. And finally, it's a call success rate. This data is reflected on a rolling 30 days basis. This is also actually real runtime data because our SDK sits in the application layer um, of all our users, and so we're being fed this to our proxy, and so it's not an SLA; it's actual data. And going into the API portal, this is what it looks like. Um, there are four parts to each API portal. There's an endpoints tab where we do most of the work. There is also a details tab which contains documentation. There's a discussions tab to communicate with the API provider, and a pricing tab where you can subscribe to plans. Here you can see that SendGrid provides 4 tiers. We allow up to 4 tiers for all our API providers. We also do recommend that create a basic free use tier just to drive some usage and lower the barriers for trial. You can see that SendGrid has structured their basic tier as a $0 plan. This limits me to 100 calls per day, and anything in excess of that is 0.001. And if that's insufficient, I can migrate to the next plan, which is $10 a month, or 80 or 200. What's nice is that at these pricing levels, there's basically very little incentive to build and manage my own SMTP server for a mailing service. Going back to the endpoints tab, let's try this endpoint, which is post to send an email. Configuration of the endpoint is done in the middle. You can see that the only required parameter is to configure a JSON string to the recipient, the email address, and the message. After this is done, you can hit test endpoint to generate a HTTP response. And following that, if you're satisfied with the output, you can generate code in a variety of programming languages like PHP or Python. This code goes into your application and you are basically done with that. Notice that each account has one specific API key. This one is mine. And so no matter which API I use from the platform, it's going to be the same key, which means that key management becomes a non-issue for me. So I'll end the demo here. Feel free to check us out. There's a ton of stuff on there. And in case any of you are building applications and interested to ship for like co-marketing, please do let me know. And going back to my slide deck, just to wrap up. I'll talk about a few case studies that we maintain for some of our real live users. Our thesis of the API marketplace was that we want to build something that was broad-based. It wasn't vertical specific, so it was meant to be general purpose, so that no matter what your use case is, you would be able to find something useful. So here are some examples. This company is called Rakuten. They are an image and video creation platform used by over 100,000 businesses in over 50 countries. What Rakuten does is to sell to brands and agencies to create personalized video content for verticals such as e-commerce. So for example, if you transacted or let's say you went to Amazon, you shop for a pair of sunglasses and you put that in your shopping cart and you left, you never completed the purchase. What Amazon might do is to send you a 30-second personalized video to let you, to trigger you to complete the purchase. So Rakuten realized that better personalization equals better conversion. So they were looking for better ways to do this through APIs. So some of the features that the functionality that they access through Rakuten RapidAPI included geolocation. So by detecting the user's IP, they could detect where they were and what their native language was, which then let you create customized messages like text overlays in their native language. And of course, to do that translation, you can rely on a translation API as well. These APIs enabled them to launch 3 major new features in 2 weeks. This was 75% less time than they required or than they expected, which saved them about $15,000 of development costs. More importantly is the value created, right? Imagine the time savings by going to market faster and also the value created by customers. In this case, they were able to increase pricing conversion by 7% across their thousands of customers. Another example is ShopBrain, an e-commerce player that's building the world's most up-to-date e-commerce product data. Their AI-based engine that aggregates data at scale through a variety of sources. This includes web scraping, accessing APIs, and also edge computing through their browser and mobile app product. Now, what ShopBrain was looking to do was to expand into the travel vertical. The idea was that for travelers, people were, number one, they were more price sensitive. Second, when people were looking to travel, there is a fixed time frame. It's not like buying a T-shirt or something, you can put off that purchase. But if you need to travel, you need to travel. And thirdly, with they already had a captive user base that was interested in this data. So effectively for ShopBrain, they were looking to use their existing user base, existing products, but they needed travel data to basically see the new vertical. And so they relied to us using a variety of travel-related APIs to see this data. This let them save over 600 hours of engineering time. And this feature rolling out to their entire user base let them increase lifetime value by 20%. So that's where I'll end my webinar. We'd love to connect. I package a few things here, which the DreamFactory team will share to all of you. I've included a link where you can register for our site. Please do check us out. If you're an API provider or a user looking to use APIs or get on the platform, please feel free to reach out to me. We'd love to chat. I've also included a special link for free API credit to get started in case you're interested. If you like what we're doing, check us out on like Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you everyone for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Jed. I hope everybody found that as informative as I did. And as Jed mentioned, perhaps tomorrow, if not very early next week, we'll be distributing these slides to the attendees. And again, don't forget the additional Rakuten RapidAPI credit that's included in the link. Also, to those of you who are going to view this video after we post it on YouTube and other areas, we'll extend the same offer to you. Feel free to get in touch either with DreamFactory or RapidAPI, and we'll be happy to set you up with some credits and again a free trial to the DreamFactory environment as well. With that, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. And again, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And of course, special thanks to Jed over at Rakuten RapidAPI Marketplace for spending his time with us today. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.